Genesis chapter 2, second half of verse 24 and verse 25. Gender roles part 4, talking about sex. So it says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother, and we talked about that a lot on Saturday, and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed. You know, the Bible has a lot to say about sex and relationships. And, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it sad that because sex can be so taboo and something we don't talk about, that so many God-loving Christians are suffering from a lack of biblical teaching on an extremely important subject. I mean, you think about it, right? Like, how many relationships have problems related to sex? How many people suffer from the consequences of ungodly and unbiblical sex? You know, like it's a big deal. And because like, oh, we can't talk about that, it's private. Well, the Bible speaks a whole lot about this private subject. And so I'm going to waste all my time introducing this, and we only have limited time. So in verse 24, it says, the two shall be joined. He shall be joined to his wife. They shall become one flesh. Our word for one there is echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. We have a triune God, but he's one. There is something where even though Jesus and the Father and the Holy Spirit are separate, they're also one. And this is what's supposed to happen in marriage, where the two become one. Now, we see this even physically in the act of sexual relations. And that's the idea of consummating the marriage, is when the two become one. In a Jewish marriage tradition, you become betrothed, and at that point, the bride price is paid, the husband has the bride. You could call her his wife. It would not be an incorrect term. Just like Mary and Joseph, they were betrothed. To separate, they would have to get divorced, but the marriage had not yet been consummated. That's that final thing that really seals the deal in marriage. And in verse 25, it tells us really plainly, they were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. You know, godly sex within marriage, there should never be anything to be ashamed of. There shouldn't be anything to hide. There shouldn't be anything to fear. Now, you know, pause there, because sadly, right, you're getting advice from a sinner, and you're all a bunch of sinners. And more than likely, you, and most definitely I, have had our opinions on sex influenced by the world. So when I say godly sex, I'm not going to sit here and nitpick all these finer points and this is good, this is bad, this is okay, this is not. But what I will say is that whether it is movies and romance novels or pornography, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that might not be considered godly sex. And so when I say need not be ashamed, I mean, well, no, we might be drawn to something that maybe wasn't God's original design for sex. And that's something that couples can kind of figure out on their own, and they can talk one-on-one with maybe another close and godly, mature couple that they trust to have those conversations with. I think Tim LaHaye, author of Left Behind, him and Jerry Jenkins, right? They wrote Left Behind. That Tim LaHaye wrote The Act of Marriage with his wife. And that was a book that my pastor gave my wife and I, and it gets into the nitty-gritty and some of the details. And for people who have stayed pure, a book like that's very handy. But there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a thing to remember, that once you're married, this should be something freeing and fun and enjoying. But on the flip side, outside of marriage, it is something to be ashamed of. Now, I know I had my first child when I was a senior in high school, right? So that gives me the authority to preach from my own poor choices. It's not a self-righteous, how dare someone have sex outside of marriage. No, I'm just saying, yeah, I've faced the consequences of that. I've faced the consequences of that. And looking at my watch, right? I literally just paid my last child support payment because my daughter's graduated. And you know what? She was worth every penny. But it was a painful experience. And the drama. And then all these things, this baggage I had from that previous relationship that I brought into my marriage, that created problems. When we do things God's way, there's a beautiful synergy that takes place again when the gender roles understand things, and part of that is understanding that God designed one man and one woman for life, and that when we give ourselves away, because the act of sex is the two becoming one flesh, something happens there, and it can't be taken lightly. And then when we go from one place to the next, there's something happening. Now imagine if, because it's rare, and many of us can't say we went down this road, but imagine if you had eyes only for your wife, and she had eyes only for you, and you went into a sexual relationship with no distortions from a previous relationship, no distortions from pornography. I know that there are men out there, and probably women too. You see steamy romance in The Notebook. I've never seen it, but whatever. It's some kind of, 50 Shades of Grey. Never seen that either, and you shouldn't either. I'm just saying, I know what these things are. And let's say you get an idea of what romance looks like, and your husband's just not that romantic. And now your love life is suffering because you've allowed the world to influence what you thought romance was supposed to look like. Or if you've watched pornography and you've seen the extremities of sexual acts and perversion that they take things to. But your wife won't do those things. And for whatever reason, you thought that would be fun or satisfying, and now it's not happening. And once again, the world has tainted the sexual relation that God designed. But what if, maybe it's too late for all of us. But what if we could pass it on to that next generation? The idea that what if a man had kept his eyes pure, and when he saw his wife, it was the only naked woman that he had ever really laid eyes on, and she was beautiful to him because she was his and he was hers, and that's all that mattered. The idea that it wasn't comparing it to everything else, but it was just her. All I ever wanted, all I ever needed. And I'm not missing out on anything because I haven't planted these seeds in my mind of other things I should want and need, because all I've ever had was her. And then when a man or a woman, but once again, God made us different. I'm just going to roll with what I think the norm is of how God made us. Men, especially younger men, and maybe middle-aged men, and probably older men, every now and then have this drive for sex. There was is his name Michael Gungor? Because that's the name of a musician too. But there's a comedic marriage counselor who's a Christian. My wife and I watched him once, and he was just talking about that, how like all of a sudden man gets this urge that he wants to be with his wife. And that's like a cue. Ding. All right. And I'm also supposed to lead her. I'm supposed to sacrifice for her. I'm supposed to be a servant to my wife because this is Christ and the church. And it's a funny reminder that I have needs and she has needs. And oftentimes for any men or women watching, let me let you in on a little secret. If your needs aren't being met, your best bet of that ever happening is meeting their needs first. Because satisfied customers come back and help. And there is something where, maybe I'm just really simple. I'll tell you what, man, my wife can, grab my arm and say, ooh, you're so strong. And next thing you know, I want to clean the kitchen. There's something about when you fill me up, all of a sudden I want to fill you up. And there's a synergy that takes place. I could go really long today, and I don't want to, but I don't want to miss out on a couple important things. 1 Corinthians 7 is where it talks about that we're not supposed to withhold sex from each other. Now, just like every verse in the Bible, It's not to be used as a hammer that you beat your spouse with, not supposed to withhold sex from one another. But it is a reminder for us that God designed this, God called it good and holy, and therefore it's something I should enjoy. One prayer all couples should pray, separately and maybe together. Lord, have us have a like vision and desire and need for sex and intimacy and romance. I don't care if she comes to me or I come to him or whatever. Let's meet in the middle, though. Wherever we're at, let's meet there. But here's the thing, is in 1 Corinthians 7, it gives a reason. It says, don't separate for long, lest Satan come in and tempt you. You know, if someone commits adultery, someone starts looking at pornography, it's all on them. They have to own up to their own sin. You can't force someone to commit adultery. But you can definitely lure them that direction. The example I gave when we were teaching out of the Proverbs, which I'll mention something there real quick too. In Proverbs, is it 5, 6, 7? Kind of in there is all the adultery stuff. It's, well, a lot of it. And I was talking about if I just picked on someone, right? If I just found someone and just started picking on them. Now, nothing gives us the right to punch another person in the face in anger, per se. I mean, defending someone, but you get what I'm saying. It's a sin to just take someone out. But if I started tearing down that person's wife and making fun of her and belittling her, and I started tearing down their kids and I started picking on them, and then they lost their temper and punched me, they might get arrested. They have to own up for their sin. But man, oh man, did I have it coming. That's kind of the same thing. We have to own up for our choices. No one can force us to commit adultery. No one can force us to commit sexual immorality. But we definitely can poke and prod at someone and put them in a position where they become more temptable by Satan, because Satan knows our weak points. And if that's a weak point for someone, Satan will try to exploit it. Very simple. I don't know how many pastors who I've looked up to over the years, people I know, people who are close and far, who have fallen into this sin because Satan knew this was a guy that God wanted to use, and I found an open door, and I'm going to exploit it. Now, in Proverbs chapter 7, which I don't even know what I'm reading. I just know I'm supposed to go there. Well, actually, no, chapter 5, even better. It says, drink water from your own cistern and running water from your own well. Should your fountains be dispersed abroad? The idea is what if all that sexual energy, what if all of that desire to be fed, Every Man's Battle, good book for men, it talks about how, even when we look at women with lust, it's like I'm taking some of that energy and I'm expending it on someone who's not my wife. And I'm letting my fountains be dispersed everywhere. And just but what if it was all just focused on her? She had all that energy, all that attention. Let them be only for your own and not for strangers with you. Let your fountains be blessed and rejoice with the wife of your youth. As a loving deer and a graceful doe, let her breast satisfy you at all times and always be enraptured with her love. Why should you, my son, be enraptured by an immoral woman and be embraced by the arms of a seductress? And it's that idea that all that energy, all that attention should come from your spouse. Now, here's something I'm going to throw out there, and this is maybe a good closing note, is that I'm going off of the norms here, gender roles, right? Typically, men do like sex more than women. And as 1 Corinthians 7 says, if a woman continually withholds that, you're putting the man in a position to go seek it from somewhere else. It's still on him, but it's a real thing. But let's flip roles here to something I think equally as true by every means. Women, on the whole, have a need for love, for communication, and relationship. And that takes a lot more time than sex. And if a man withholds that from a woman, he should not be surprised when she is tempted by Satan to go and seek it from somewhere else. That's the idea, is that we all have needs. And maybe your needs are something different. But in the genders, God did instill specific needs. And so, the idea is that if you know what your spouse needs and you withhold it from them, they are responsible for their own actions. But heaven forbid you open the door to let Satan in. Goes both ways. And so I think all of us as Christians, I think this needs to be taught in the church, because the amount of divorce and adultery and infidelity in the church is unacceptable. And part of the reason is because people are not dealing with these problems before they explode in their face. I would advise you to get marriage counseling before you need it. Go get a health checkup. Go and talk to someone before you need the help, right? Don't just wait until there's a fire to put the fire out. Go buy a fire extinguisher and some smoke alarms. Put them up in the house so when the evil day comes, you're prepared. They are both naked, the man and his wife. They were not ashamed. It was something beautiful and intended for godly purposes. If God made sex, then we should not be afraid of it. We should try to better understand his plan for it and embrace it and try and do things his way. Last thing, hey, if you're outside of marriage and you're in a physical relationship, think about getting married. If you're willing to put all this other stuff on the line, why not make that real commitment? Get married. Get married and make it right in God's eyes, and start seeking his will in your life and have his will be done. Hey, I'm always free to be messaged, guys. You know how to get a hold of me. It's a little circle with a lightning bolt in it, right? God bless you guys. Have an amazing day. And I will see you guys tomorrow. Genesis chapter 3. My coffee's brewing. I don't have coffee. I really want coffee right now. So adios, guys. Take care.